Good evening and welcome to our usual Wednesday night book study. This is one of two outreach events we have every week. And the reason I wanted to touch a little bit on the reason why we're having this book study is because we are in the process of developing our identity as an income-sharing Christian community. Intentional community here in the Catskill region of New York. And the Christian component of it is, when we say we are Christian, what exactly does that mean? Because we know that it means different things to different people. And it's really important for us to only attract people who are aligned with our worldview, our version of Christianity. So that's why we're doing these Wednesday night studies, so that you can see what kind of Christianity we represent here at this place, so that you can decide for yourself if it's for you or not. So we are currently in chapter 2 of this book, Christian Anarchism by Alexander Christianopoulos. We are in chapter 2. Chapter 2 deals with anything that's not the Sermon on the Mount, and we are currently talking about the crucifixion of Jesus, which is kind of appropriate at this time of year when we're approaching Easter. The Christianopoulos has decided to divide this section into 5 sub-chapters, and this is today we're going to deal with number 2. The first one was 2 weeks ago, because last week we had to skip because of technical difficulties, but 2 weeks ago we talked about the powers and principalities that Paul is talking about. I know Paul is writing after the crucifixion, but he defines the powers and principalities that are exactly what Jesus was here to replace, or give a new interpretation of what we should do with them. And I think he means that we should get rid of them. Because today we are looking at this idea that what the crucifixion was is easy to think that it is total defeat, and now the whole movement of Jesus is gone. But the Christian anarchist writers, and for some reason Tolstoy is remarkably absent from this chapter, but the writers are arguing that what looks like a defeat is really a triumph. And it's obviously a concept that's pretty hard to understand. So to do it justice, I think I'm going to simply read. The chapter is a little over a page maybe. And it's really well written, and it really explains well how this is actually what's being portrayed. So the trial and the execution, the carrying out of the execution, and everything around it explains why Jesus did what he did, to expose the powers that are corrupt and demonic. And we'll see Chelchiki, we have met him before, he's from the 13th century, I believe, is writing that the Passion of Jesus reveals the true character of the political powers. They are demonic, violent, and out of control. And that was the whole purpose of the whole thing here. Let's say that, for example, Pilate had let Jesus go and not executed him. Then these powers would not have been exposed, and they would not have, in this context, would not have been defeated. So in the very carrying out of the execution, they defeated themselves, is the argument. So I'm just going to read it so that you'll get a better understanding. I don't feel comfortable that I could actually explain it in a way that does it justice, so this is better. Nevertheless, because Paul just ended the previous paragraphs with for contending against the soul of the Jewish and Roman authorities, Jesus was executed as a political subversive. The fight against the powers, therefore, demands important sacrifices. So, in other words, sacrificing and suffering was part of defeating these corrupt powers. Nevertheless, Paul says that by his crucifixion, Jesus disarmed and these powers, made a public example of them, and triumphed over them. Similarly, Craig writes that through Jesus' execution, Satan was judged and bound. In Christian thinking, explains Illul, the crucifixion of Christ is his true victory over all powers. How can such a paradoxical conclusion be reached? Because, as Chelshiki understands what I just said before, the passion of Jesus reveals the true character of the political powers. They are demonic, violent, and out of control, and we need to get rid of them. Unfortunately, in this world, they are still there, so we have some work to do. But the difference now is that we have a hope in Jesus. Wink writes that they stripped him naked and crucified him in humiliation, all unaware that this very act had stripped them of the last covering that disguised the towering wrongness of the whole way of living that their violence defended. The law by which he was judged is itself judged, set aside and nailed to the cross. So that is a reference to Jesus' statement about fulfilling the law, not to abandon it, but to fulfill the law. By the very violence with which the powers execute Jesus, their character is exposed for what it truly is. Myers, therefore, speaks of the crucified Jesus representing at once both defendant and prosecutor, depending on which court, earthly or heavenly, is being considered. What appears to be his defeat and the triumph of both Rome and the Sanhedrin, narrated in his trial and execution, is really his vindication and their judgment. I don't know if you remember, but during the trials, there were several trials. There was the religious trial, there was the political trial, and there was the trial before Herod, and another trial before Pilate. So the religious leaders came up with all kinds of accusations, and they noted didn't hold water, and they ended up with an accusation of blasphemy. But they didn't tell Pilate that. They told him that they were accusing him of wanting to replace Caesar. So they convicted him, but Pilate exonerated him. So there's this duality between, on the one side is he's both defendant and prosecutor, and he's also convicted and exonerated at the same time. So it's kind of interesting. What looks like an apparent political failure, confirms Bartley, is in fact a political statement, which is part of a larger strategy of success. Hence, what the powers conceive of as their victory is in reality their judgment and defeat. So Berkhoff puts it differently. The principalities and powers are unmasked as false gods by their encounter with very God. They are made a public spectacle. In their encounter with the Christ, religious and political institutions reveal their tyrannical character. I don't know if you remember from the previous chapter that these powers might not necessarily be tyrannical, but they could become tyrannical or and demonic. And this is evidence that they actually did that. They were they were no longer following God. They were trying to be God and ask people to follow their instructions, their command, worship them. Moreover, their unmasking is actually already their defeat. And that's Berkhoff speaking here. Jesus disarms the powers because their weapon was the power of illusion, their ability to convince men that they were the divine regents of the world. So that was what I just said. They were trying to replace God as the regent of the world. And this weapon is struck out of their hands by Jesus' refusal to assign them this importance. Yoder argues that although Jesus submitted to the powers, morally he broke their rules by refusing to support them in their self-glorification, the violent expression of this, of which is exposed in the Crucifixion. So, while to some Jesus' crucifixion is the meting out of a deserved punishment to a dangerous subversive, and to others it represents the end of the road for the naive hopes of a utopian community, to Christian anarchists and to most Christians, however, paradoxical and counterintuitive, the crucified Jesus is the fulfillment rather than negation of the vocation of Christian messianic kingship. So, for some, it's and that's the religious leaders. He is the just punishment of a political and dangerous armed criminal, and to others, it's the end of a hope for a utopian community. And for the rest, Christians say that this is the vindication of fulfillment of the messianic kingship. On the cross, Jesus' alternative kingdom is not conclusively crushed, but triumphantly exemplified and vindicated. His very crucifixion is his victory over the powers and his inauguration of the kingdom of God. Yeah. And that's Myers speaking here at the end. Indeed, this is what Yoder understands the story of the two disheartened followers of Jesus walking back from his crucifixion to be about. Jesus' rebuke to the unseeing pair on the road to Emmaus was not that they had been looking for a kingdom and should not have been, but that they were failing to see that the suffering of the Messiah is the inauguration of the kingdom. For Christian anarchists, then, the way of the cross is both the via negativa of resistance to political oppression and the positive experimentation of a genuine new way of social organization. And these themes are further explored in chapters 4 and 5, which means that we are going to be studying this book for quite a while. I'm looking forward to 4 and 5, absolutely. So that, I think, concludes our session for tonight. Next week, we're going to be talking about the crucified Messiah, and that will be the third installment in this tiny series about Jesus' crucifixion. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for coming.